To the ones we left behind, I can only say I'm sorry. Over the course of the summer of 2002, I had really been upping my individual game and challenging a lot of the rest of the member base of Arlington Heights to better themselves, or at least in the hopes of bettering themselves. We were having a lot more large-scale member nights that included the members from other centers, mainly Downers Grove, because there really wasn't anything else beyond that at that point. It seems like from the day I first started playing, we would hear nonstop about the new center that they would be opening very soon, any month now, any day now. The new center in Hoffman Estates would be open. It was something that wasn't just a rumor, and as a matter of fact, this center had been talked about being open since literally 1998. In fact, if you go to alt.sport.lasertag and look up Hoffman Estates and find the earliest post, you'll see the first one was by Brainwash from Downers Grove in 1998. That's how far back the planning for this center went, and I don't think it was just a rumor either. In fact, I talked to Travis, who would soon to be the area manager of the epicenter. He had told me that basically the planning stages for Hoffman Estates did start all the way back in 98. I think that the only thing that really prevented that center and a bunch of other centers, including Atlanta, from not being opened on time was the financial hardships. I didn't say hardship, hard shit that Laser Quest, the company, had taken in the late 90s with some very, very questionable business decisions and essentially grinded the company's expansion to a staunch halt. So if you weren't already in the know, the years between 1997 and 2000 marked some malinvestments, let's call them, on behalf of Laser Quest, which essentially dried up all their capital, and any new lines of credit that they might have needed were now out of reach, at least temporarily. This is also a story for another time, but it was an important preamble to understand the timing of events. October 29th, 2002, Hoffman Estates officially opened for its free preview week. This is something that all LQs do, where they send out a bunch of free passes in the mail, or essentially just notifications that there's free games. All games for the first entire week of a new center are essentially free. Hoffman Estates would then open the following week, this time, however, officially for business. Flashback exactly 1 year prior to November of 2001. It would be on this week that Laser Quest Norwich would officially open its doors for its free preview week, and the following week open for business on their end. This is important as Travis Kufelt, general manager at that time of Arlington Heights, would then relinquish his position as GM of that store to take over as GM to the now open Norwich Center. This, of course, leaves the general manager position at Arlington Heights now vacant. Enter Cara Sermano, new general manager of Arlington Heights. She would be a blank slate. She was not promoted from within the company, but hired from the outside, from what I remember to be some restaurant general manager position. Travis, during his run as GM of Arlington Heights, had a tempestuous relationship with the member base. I think that would be probably the best way to describe it. But he was considered by and large by the member base and the collective as a whole to be a stern but fair general manager when dealing with the member base. Cara, on the other hand, at this point would be considered at best to be a mystery box, which only the year of 2002 would shed any light on. Flash forward now to the start of the NAC season 2002. Cara would not have any interactions with the member base. She had used assistant managers Locutus and Gamer as proxies for any dealings. After tryouts were over and the team had officially been codified in stone, thus would begin the fundraising aspect for the collective in the year 2002, which would feature a car wash. We had talked about doing a car wash in 2001, but never actually pulled the trigger on it or bothered really even organizing it. This time would be different. We would actually act on it, and at some point in late spring of 2002, we would go on to have our first official car wash. It was considered a success, and we would do a second car wash. Between the two car wash events, we made just over $300. This said $300 would be then agreed by the team to be held by the staff at the center itself. This would prove to be a horrible mistake. We would then come to find out on the week that the NAC entry fee was due, that very Tuesday night, that our NAC fund was no longer possessed by the center. No reason, no explanation, just poof, gone. Nowhere to be found. No word, no clue as to what happened to it. Of course, this left all of us on the team, as anybody would be, outraged. We demanded to know what happened. Was it lost? Was it stolen? What was the word? What was the story? We demanded an investigation. We would come to find out that it was either deposited by accident or stolen. And the only three people who had any ability to move or touch this said money were Gamer, assistant manager number 1, assistant manager number 2, Locutus, or number 3, the general manager, Kara Sermano. We, of course, were forced to get in contact with Steve Garrett and report the situation to him and ask for an investigation into what might have happened. It would come up pretty much empty-handed from there. There'd be no word as to what exactly happened to our NAC fund, other than it was definitely lost or stolen. And the only possibility and only way that the staff could have lost this money was to have accidentally deposited it. However, this would have left a paper trail. So when investigated, it turns out that there were no deposits that were $300 some odd over. It was kept with the store cash. So the only option left is that it was straight out stolen. And there were only 3 suspects, only 3 possibilities as to who it could have been, because nobody else had access to the safe at that point. There was no center manager, it was only the GM and the 2 assistants. Now, Gamer it's simply not in his character. I've known the guy since high school, and at this point I'd known him for about 5 years. And amongst the members of the team, he was considered the most trustworthy and the least likely suspect. Which now leaves Locutus and Kara. Now, Locutus, a lot of the people on the team did not like him. They did not trust him. And not without justified cause. There was a good reason not to trust him. Previously, towards the end of 2001, there was an incident involving the NAC players at a random members night where the members of the collective were taking part in, let's call them, some adult beverages. This was not taking place in Laser Quest proper, or even on Laser Quest's property outside. This was taking place at an adjacent parking lot, and did not in any way at all directly entail Laser Quest itself, nor its management, other than the fact that we happened to be playing that particular Tuesday night. There was no drunken incident during the course of our festivities, nor inside or outside of the maze. Yet, Locutus himself decided to take it upon himself to inform Travis of the situation post hoc, after the fact, even though nothing had happened. We suspected his motivation to be partially concerned for himself had Travis caught wind that the members were playing after drinking alcohol. Not like that would have mattered, really. But there was the other possibility that, and he had made his intentions known more than one time, that when Hoffman Estates, see how these things tie together, more than just a little interested in the manager position at the newly opening Hoffman Estates Center. Locutus had a reputation at that point amongst the rest of the staff as a bit of what I would classify as an office or corporate climber. And if you're not familiar with what that means somebody who is in an office who may be in a similar position as their fellow employees or be in a lower management position, who will do whatever it takes and stab anybody in the back or cut any throat that they have to get to the next step. Now, I will not personally say whether I felt Locutus was that or not, and in fact, I considered him a friend, and I still do, but he had that reputation, and with him making his intentions known about the management position in Hoffman Estates, you can put two and two together. Let's say, at very least, I feel like he would have done anything to make sure that nothing jeopardized that opportunity. But moving on, needless to say, after that, he would have some amount of bad blood with the members of the collective as well as other members from the base. So upon the revelation of the missing money incident, there were many players that were quick to point the finger at Locutus and insist that he had likely taken the money. Except when you approach this with a degree of logic and criticism and rationality, logic would not dictate this. Logic would dictate that he would not want to implicate himself in stealing $300. He would not jeopardize his future opportunities with the company. That's just not what somebody does who, if his reputation is true, it's just not somebody with that reputation, it's not what they would do. So, in my mind, Locutus was already off the table, which only left one person. And there was no evidence, we had no evidence pointing to that one last remaining person, but from knowing and being friends with the other two, I wasn't blind to the possibility that Locutus, I didn't know him well enough, it could have been him. But in my mind, that already wasn't the case, despite what some of my fellow players would have thought about him. So we were left with only one possibility and absolutely no evidence. And if that alone wasn't bad enough, we were also left with absolutely no path of recourse. There was nothing we could do to get our money back. LQ would not replace that money because technically they were never liable to protect that money in the first place. So this was on us. Our NAC fund, 2 car washes, gone, down the drain. We'd have to accept the facts and just deal with it. But this was a very important story to lay out and to explain as to why the eventual jump to Hoffman happened. A lot of people want to pin this on one particular incident, but as you'll soon see, it was definitely a multitude of events, to put it lightly. Throughout the course of 2002, and mainly the summer, Arlington Heights' member nights were bigger than they had been in many, many years. It had no longer been just a core group of individuals who played on Tuesday night. Including the Downers Grove players, we were now, on average, having Tuesday nights of about 18 to 30 people, depending. Things were good. Things were fun. And things were definitely getting more competitive, especially with the DG players being there, as there was a rivalry that had always existed between the two centers, which now had a lot of fresh new blood on their end as well. That new blood that I speak of would actually include faces like Marine, Curly, and even Ronan. So in a way, this time period was a bit like a bit of a renaissance for the Chicagoland Laser Quest centers. One new center opened and another one set to open by the end of the year. Flash forward to late October of 2002. Hoffman Estates is officially open, and they are currently running their preview week. We have visited the center at least twice by this point, and introduced ourselves to the management over there. Now, there was, of course, a reason why we had decided to introduce ourselves to the management of Hoffman Estates, and to understand why, you should really go back and listen to the Team Off Timeline Part 1, as the tensions between the new blood and the old guard were actually about to hit their peak at this point in time. I actually neglected to mention the fact that 1 year prior to this, it was actually an idea that Zim wanted to put together a team at Norwich when Norwich first opened. And his plan was to get together some of the guys who were newer potentials from Downers Grove, along with myself and people like Dark Dragon and Anubis, who was a mercenary at that point in time, to form a team in Norwich. And obviously, it goes without saying, that idea never come to fruition, partially because when it comes to things like that with Zim, they usually end up being clown shoes if they're executed at all, or just not happening. And they didn't happen, but it wasn't due to really any particular reason other than the fact that his arm was broken. But to be honest with you, I don't think this would have worked out for him anyway, as the headspace that I was actually in at that point, I would not have been interested to jump ship on Arlington Heights at that point. But that's another story as well. In fact, ironically, in some ways, it would actually be that 2002 NAC season which made me want to reconsider the way things currently were at that time. But getting back to the subject at hand, as tensions were beginning to come to a boil between the new guard and the old blood, something was going to have to happen. And of course, now, unlike the year before, there was some legit talks amongst a lot of the new blood in potentially just leaving Arlington Heights behind in order to avoid having to do something like a coup or, seriously damaging friendships that we had. Because this, of course, it never goes down in any way that other than being absolutely ugly. And at that point, it looked like our best option would just be to sever our ties with Arlington Heights and jump over to Hoffman. So there was some talks of that, but as you will soon find out, it wasn't actually as simple as that. As I'm sure most of you are aware, something is about to happen. Something major was about to go down, which would end up changing the course of everything and, of course, turning everything on its head. So this last week in October of 2002 would not only feature the opening week of Hoffman Estates, but would also be the week, our annual tradition of our Halloween Members Night. And on this night, the members of Arlington Heights would, of course, dress up and play Halloween-themed games. It was something that, at least as long as I had been playing, was a tradition. And little did we know that before the festivities were to begin, a piece of news would be bestowed upon us, which would be, let's just say, earth-shattering, at least for two people involved. And that was, of course, that in a previous week, apparently, and I was unaware of this, and I think many of us were unaware, that there was an incident regarding two players from the collective, that being Lionel, our faithful team captain, and Sting, apparently were involved in something where a marshal had caught them, probably during a game of Borg at a previous member night. It was probably either the week before or maybe 2 weeks before. It was very close in proximity to this time, where apparently they were climbing on the walls, and when the marshal had caught them and admonished them for that, they basically were disrespectful and disregarded the orders to stop climbing the walls. Now, this was something that, unlike, let's say, the previous instance of drinking in an adjacent parking lot, was something that was an actual negative committed by these particular players, where this was potentially justified. So, upon our arrival that night, everyone's in costume, and we find out that Lionel and Sting have been banned. And this came down from the general manager. She herself, of course, was not there to deliver that news. It came through whoever the manager was on duty. I can't remember at that point. But, so yeah, they were apparently banned for 3 months, I believe. It was a 90-day ban. Pretty reasonable. And while there was some controversy regarding this, because they had claimed, and they being Lionel and Sting, that this didn't accurately represent what actually happened, to me and to many others who knew the history of these guys, it didn't really matter. It didn't matter one bit, because they had done far worse things that were rule-breaking, that flew under the radar or simply were overlooked. And to a lot of people, this would be a long time coming. They had basically avoided being called out and having consequences for many other things that they've done. And in my honest opinion, and I think many others felt this way, this was probably the dumbest thing they could have chose to finally, pin on these guys and give them consequences for it. It's the equivalent of kicking your dog after they barked, but they've done all these other things leading up to, they've bitten you, they've shat on your rug, they drank all your beer, they ate out of the garbage, and then, you don't do anything about any of that, and then they bark at somebody outside, and you decide to go off and kick them. It's like, really? But I digress. So that's the news, that basically 2 of our figureheads are now have been banned, and they felt this to be somewhat unjustified, to say the least. Ironically, this would actually make headlines all over LQ Arena, as everybody was aware of this whole situation, but I'm pretty sure that nobody was aware of the full spectrum and reasons, and you are only hearing it from one side at that point. And I'm pretty sure that many people would potentially attribute this to the reason for the center switch, but it actually was one part of it which had a lot more nuance than most were aware of, even if you were paying attention to the situation back then. So, in protest, many of the players that night had decided to ask for a refund and leave and go to Chili's across the street instead of playing LQ that night. Now, for me and some of the new blood who didn't feel that this was necessarily the most unjustified consequence ever, decided to say, hey, we'll leave, but we'll play a game or 2 first. So we did. And during that time, while the old blood was over at, I keep calling them old blood. It's new blood and old guard, but anyway. While the old guard was sitting and, bitching and moaning about what had happened and the injustice that they had experienced, me and a few of the other guys had a chance to talk, and I saw this as potentially probably the greatest thing ever. Because before they left, the first things that were out of the mouth of Lionel, who had declared, Hoffman Estates next year. That's where we're going. And this was a eureka moment in my mind. And I just said to myself, oh, thank God. Because they just made things so much easier if this was going to be the case. Because now, the reason why this is such a great thing, now we don't have to have a coup. We, the new blood, don't have to switch centers anymore. We don't have to do a thing. If the old guard is all gonna pile on, and that's really the dividing line here, is the people who felt that this was a complete injustice and intolerable were all members of the old guard, where the members of the new blood said, yeah, this is probably an injustice, but it's not necessarily... It's not like you didn't have something coming eventually, but what this meant was we were about to potentially have a split roster of the old guard playing for Hoffman Estates and the new blood playing for Arlington Heights. But of course, this is not where this story ends. So in the next part, we're going to talk about what those two potential rosters almost looked like and what exactly the final straw was, because as I'm sure everyone's aware, there was no split roster between the two centers. So that'll be about it for this time. And if anybody actually has any questions regarding this, out of curiosity, please feel free to, chime in and let me know in the comments section or on the Facebook page. But next time, we'll get into the ultimate exodus of Arlington Heights and what that final straw was all about.